Well, I hope you brought your sandals and your staffs and your turbans, because we're taking a journey to a land far, far away in the east called Babylon. This book was written and the things took place in it a very, 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 very long time ago, about 600 BC. That is 2,600 years ago. So 26 centuries. It's a long time. 2.5 millennia. This is ancient. It's really, really old. And that's just gonna kind of underline the relevance of it. There's so much wisdom in this book for us today that it's just one of the further proofs that this is God's word that speaks to us. There's fascinating background knowledge about Babylon. Babylon at this time was the largest city in the world. A meager 200,000 people, but at that time, that's New York City, that's Tokyo, that's London, whatever. That's the center of the world is what this was. It was about 1,600 miles east and a little north of Jerusalem. So this is where Daniel spent his entire life from this point forward. The chapter ends by saying he was there all the way through Cyrus. So there was a lot of changes of hands. It went from Nebuchadnezzar to his son Belshazzar. You had Darius, and then you had Cyrus, who was the guy who eventually sent them back to the land. So Daniel was there the whole time. He ministered for decades in the highest court in the world at the time. So like I said, there's tons of amazing stuff you can read about the background, but we'll just be sticking to the text ourselves as we study this. So from chapter 1 here, and this first introduction and this first story of Daniel and the food and the wisdom of him and his friends, we'll just take 4 divisions. First, we'll look at Daniel himself. Secondly, we'll look at his decision not to defile himself. Thirdly, we'll consider his demeanor once he made that decision, the way he went about seeking that. And then fourthly, we'll look at his development and how he and his friends were rising in prominence. And then we'll end with just a couple applications. So first, Daniel. He was one of the regal exiles. Him and all his friends were from the tribe of Judah. They weren't priests. They were of royal or noble lineage. So when Nebuchadnezzar came and he took Jehoiakim, out, he took members of the royal household with, and he made a specific request to the chief of his eunuchs who ran his courts that he get young men of the royal families of Judah who were without blemish, handsome in appearance, and who were endowed with wisdom and readiness. And Daniel was one of these royal, noble exiles out of Jerusalem, far, far away to the kingdom of Babylon. Now, this happened because of the sin of God's people. For centuries, hundreds of years, God sent prophets to them to call them back from their evil ways. And eventually, when they didn't listen, God sent them into exile as he said he would. But he was faithful to them in that, and Daniel's like a shining example of that faithfulness, and that God had plans even in their exile. Daniel was also young. In verse 4, it calls them youths. This would be like even pre-adolescence. So Daniel was probably somewhere between 12 and 14 years old when he went there. And so he would have been trained for 3 years. So by the time he was 15, 17, maybe 18, he would have entered into the king's service. So he was a very young man. So shout out to Walter. It's about your age. So, back in the days, man, you didn't live as long, so you had to get busy. So that's what it was. They were young. Let's ask the question, so what is Daniel? What is he? I mean, what's his office? What's his role as a general minister of God? Jesus calls him the prophet Daniel in the New Testament. The prophet Daniel had said this. So Daniel is a prophet in the sense that he spoke words from God. He's one of the prophets who kind of fits the classic bill, like the classic idea of a prophet who tells the future. Daniel's preeminent in that. He breaks down through his visions and dreams the future and fortunes of the kingdoms to come. And he gets into such detail in his prophecies that, most scholarship today says that Daniel was written in like the 2nd century BC. Because there's no way, they say, he could have prophesied with such accuracy. Of course he did. And that's easy for God to do. So Daniel's a prophet in that way. But he's not a prophet like the other prophets were. A prophet's a mouthpiece for God. And the prophets were called by God to minister to the people in their own day through speech. They were preachers. And they preached and applied the law of Moses to God's people and called them to repentance. And that's what prophets did. Daniel didn't do that. He wasn't a priest either. He wasn't of the tribe of Levi. He didn't have a priestly lineage. Ezekiel was like a prophet priest in that regard. And Ezekiel was in the exile at this time. But what is Daniel? Well, Daniel he's a statesman. He lived in the world of courts and kings. It's where he spent all his time. He was an advisor to the highest courts in all the world at the time. Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, has a nickname for Daniel, or what he considered him to be. This is in Daniel 4:9. When he had a dream, and Belteshazzar is the name they gave him, so that's what he calls him. But Nebuchadnezzar had a terrible dream, which we'll get to in chapter 4, and no one could interpret it, so he finally called in Daniel. And this is what he said to him: "O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians," is what he called him. And the King James is master of the magicians, so I went with that for the sermon title because, it's all good. Daniel was a magician, He was, in Nebuchadnezzar's view, he was the preeminent wise man who outstripped all the others. There was this class of wise men that surrounded Nebuchadnezzar. There were magicians, there were enchanters, there were astrologers, there were Chaldeans. That's a word that it's not about a people group, it's about a learned class of wise men. And, it sounds like a list from Minecraft. I'm just wondering where the evokers and the illusioners are, you know what I'm saying? It's got all those, so. And these men they were a learned class that were devoted to, it says in chapter 1 here, the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So they had to be familiar with the language itself. So Daniel would have become a master in Aramaic. That was the tongue spoken at the time. He would have been trained in Aramaic, an absolute master of the speech and writing of that language. He also would have been learned in all of the laws of the land. So he could be also a legal advisor to the king and to all the provinces. So he was a lawyer. Shout out to Jonah. But also he would have been steeped in all the lore of Babylon. All their classic stories and histories and the Epic of Gilgamesh and all that stuff. He would have known all that stuff, and he would have been masters of the literature and the books. That's what these wise men were. And Daniel was the chiefest among them. They advised the king in many matters, but as we'll see in the book, it really what mattered to the king, he would have these dreams that troubled him. Vivid, crazy dreams that he was ready to kill people to get the answer for what it meant. And this is where all the astrologers and the wise men, they couldn't do it. They ran up against the wall. There were these dreams that they could never interpret. And this is where Daniel shone. Daniel could not only interpret those dreams, he could even tell the king what his dream was before he told him and interpret it. So Daniel surpassed these men in a supernatural way. So we're going to call him the chief of the magicians. This gets into kind of the idea of like wizards versus sorcerers. Wizards versus sorcerers. We think of sorcerer, that's evil, man. A sorcerer is evil, obviously. But a wizard, at least in our customary literature, has come to mean a good thing. A wizard like Gandalf, or a wizard like Merlin. That's like the archetypal wizard, at least of the West. And those wizards they have like a faith in God, at least according to some of the traditions. Like Merlin was a Christian, according to some of the lore. Gandalf obviously serves the god of that world. So the wizard is a wise man in that class who also has a living relationship with God. Now those are stories, yo. Daniel was real. He was the real deal. Like the real magician, wizard, the godly wise man who surpassed them all. So as we go through the whole book, we're going to see that on display. It's stunning. Daniel's unique. He's amazing in those ways. And God used him for his glory in that high court. You see this theme throughout Scripture, you know. Oh, snaps. You see, think of Moses in Egypt when he had to battle the sorcerers and magicians of Egypt, like Jannes and Jambres. They could perform some of the miracles, but there was a limit. And Moses' miracles were different. They were beyond. Joseph, he's interpreting dreams, and he's outstripping the wise men of Egypt at the time. So this is like a common theme, and it's obviously fulfilled in the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the chief wise man of all history. That's just a little bit about Daniel. Secondly, let's look at his decision. So that's a little introduction to who he is, but he jumps right into the issues in chapter 1 by telling the story of really some of his first encounters as he was being trained in Babylon. So, it says in verse 7, in verse 5 through 7, that the king took all these wise men, and he brought people from all the kingdoms. Babylon was conquering everywhere. So his court was a pretty diverse place. And there would have been representatives and servants in his court from a vast array of different countries and backgrounds. So there would have been a fair amount of diversity there, you know. But but his rule for all of them was that all these young men who were going to be tested and see if they could serve in his courts as his advisors, that they be given this diet, which was right from his table. The king assigned them, verse 5, a daily portion of the food that he ate and of the wine that he drank. So this was part of their training. They were on the diet of Babylon. In verse 8, this is where Daniel makes his decision. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So right away, Daniel and his three friends, they're different than the rest. They stand out. One commentator says they stand out like an oasis in the desert amidst this Babylonian court. Because these young men, these are teenagers, if even, they have this resolve, this faith in God that they're not going to compromise on their faith. They're going to serve the true and living God no matter where they are. And if they were hoping to get by without much of a battle, that was off the table because immediately they're faced with this food issue. Daniel decides not to eat the food and not to drink the wine that comes from Nebuchadnezzar's table. Why? What was in it? Why does he make this decision? Well, the text doesn't go into great detail about it, but I think we can take a couple of guesses at why these young Jewish men may not have wanted to eat the food and drink the wine. One is because likely they was eating ham sandwiches in Babylon, man. It was bacon wrapped, everything there. So I'm saying that was a no-no for them. These were men who trusted in God, and they were under the Mosaic administration of God's kingdom there, and that came with certain dietary rules and restrictions, and so they weren't going to play on that. So I think that's a pretty good guess of why they didn't want to eat the food. A couple times God, in his prophecies about the exiles, says, you will go and you will eat unclean food among the nations, he says to the people. And that would have been a terrible curse for them. To eat something that they considered ceremonially unclean be difficult to do. So Daniel and his friends say, no way, we're not going to eat that stuff. So they opt for vegetables instead. Some commentators think the reason they didn't want to eat the food is because it was sacrificed to idols. And it would have been offered to idols, but the vegetables would have also been offered to idols too, probably. So all the food would have been offered. So it's probably unclean meat that they didn't want to eat. You know what I'm saying? They felt like Merry and Pippin when they got kidnapped by the orcs and they were offering them, they didn't eat the meat. You know what I'm saying? They didn't know what it was. So I think that's pretty easy to understand. They're not going to eat unclean foods that they can't eat, right? This is the problem they have that we don't have, but they had that problem. But then it says they also wouldn't drink the wine. So what's up with that? Wine was just a regular part of Jewish life. God blesses wine. He gives it as a gift to mankind. And all the celebrations and feasts of the Jews were accented by wine. The Lord Jesus Christ at the wedding of Cana pours out fresh wine. So wine is, it's a godly thing. So why didn't they drink the wine? Well, this is a little bit more difficult. Don't really know. Perhaps the wine was in some way especially poured out or offered to the false gods of the time. I don't really know. And commentators don't really know. But for them, it was a very clear decision. These things were not to be partaken of. And so they stood on their principles. And so they opted for vegetables and water. This is what some people they call it the Daniel diet. You know what I'm saying? So this is this is not the beginnings of vegetarianism. That's a modern thing. So this is a little bit of like a plant-based diet, though. They're not just eating broccoli and leaves, you know what I'm saying? Like they're eating a plant-based diet. So he's probably eating, I don't know what they had, rice and all, I don't know. He's eating a pretty good diet. It's not like he's starving on green beans, okay? So, but Daniel makes this decision. And this word, it really signifies, think about this. He resolved not to eat the food. So as soon as he saw what was happening, in his heart, he instantly made the choice that he was not going to eat that food. He wasn't going to do it. And this is a theme you find all throughout their time in Babylon, is the temptation to compromise, the temptation to fit in and to, just bend their beliefs a little bit so maybe they can fit in better being in exile. And that's a theme we all face in the world today, is compromising to fit in with the world system. That's going to be another one of the themes of the book of Daniel. Daniel has a very simple faith. We talked about this with wisdom not too long ago. Wisdom makes decisions easy because you've already made the decisions. It's one of the great things about wisdom. Sometimes you need to in the moment, but when you live a principled life on God's word and God's truth, then when it comes to a decision or a matter, you've already made the decision. It's not an issue. It's just a matter of resolving to stick to that decision because you know how God directs you. There's puzzly situations where you got to figure things out. This isn't one of them. This is pretty clear. And a lot of the things that we face are pretty clear, beloved. And so part of wisdom is that we don't even have to waste energy on trying to figure out whether or not we're going to do this, because if God's word is in us, then for hopefully a lot of things, we already know what the decision is. And Daniel displays that. An instant resolve, he already knew what time it was, boom, it was easy. Daniel has a very simple faith. It's a very simple faith. He's not worried about the minutia of what will happen if I do this, and then maybe this will happen, and his attendant is worried about that sort of thing, but Daniel's not. Daniel already knows what time it is. It's pretty simple, boom. Thus says the Lord, easy, it's done. So that simple faith is kind of, I think, pictured by that very simple diet he has. It's a lovely picture of simple faith. Simple faith resolves to live on God's simple provision. God's going to provide for me. He's going to give me the things I need, and it may be a very simple life I live, but it's going to be a godly one. It's going to be pronounced by wisdom. And that simplicity is what you see in Daniel. Remember, he's at the top of the world. The extravagance in Nebuchadnezzar's court would have been unbelievable. The luxuriousness would probably put to shame even the luxuriousness of our own day. The power and all the beauties on display and all the delights that were available just was other. So there's a contrast there. In the contrast of all that, you got these simple young men who shine with wisdom that's beyond any of the wise men of the place. That's his decision. Third, let's look at his demeanor. You see, I think we're with Daniel as far as the resolve goes. We know that. Yeah, we're resolved not to do wickedness. We have to resolve not to go against our own consciences in things. It is not safe to go against conscience. Even if it's something that's okay, but if you think it's sinful, don't do it. That's what Paul says. Everything that does not proceed from faith is sin. So we have to go with our consciences on matters. And I think we understand that pretty well. But Daniel gives us a lot of wisdom in how to go about doing that. The way that we stick to our convictions. And that's his demeanor here. Notice what it says. He resolved. That's a hard word. That's hardcore. Verse 8, hardcore resolve. Not going to do it. But at the end of verse 8 it says, therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Daniel is characterized by respect. He's so respectful. Think of that. Here is this guy who's telling him to eat unclean meats that God has told him is sinful, but he doesn't go cage stage. He don't go crazy on it. He's extremely respectful. And that characterizes his conduct in Babylon as it should characterize our conduct in Babylon. Respectful. He asked him to allow them not to defile themselves. Even the way he posits it to him is in that Daniel understands he's subject to Nebuchadnezzar and he's subject to his servants. And he wasn't fighting against that, man. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't standing on his P's and Q's like that and being real feisty about it. Like, boom, that's it, I'm not doing it. Discussion's over. We don't eat this stuff. No, that's not how he did it, man. He was respectful. And that respect opened doors for him. Verse 9, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So God blessed that demeanor as he came to him in that way. And, the eunuch's heart was even touched. It says compassion. So he could feel Daniel's situation because Daniel gave it to him in such a respectful, calm, and reasonable manner. He could feel that. That was understandable to him. And so already the eunuch wants to grant him his wish. The desire is already there. And then he says, but I fear the Lord, my Lord the King, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Okay, so now it's Daniel's turn to feel some compassion for the eunuch. Because he says, if I let you do this, and you guys don't look as fit, as strong as the others, then if Nebuchadnezzar's, if it's a bad morning for him, he will chop my head off for that. And I don't want to lose my head. Now Daniel, again, Daniel doesn't say, that's your problem, man. That's your problem. Doesn't say that. 11, then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat, water to drink, then let our appearance be compared with the other men. So you see that his demeanor is not only respectful, but it is resourceful. He has options to give the eunuch. He's not just going to say, that's your problem, I'm sticking to my convictions, and we're not going to talk about it anymore, that's that. Now he's going to seek ways to help the eunuch accommodate his beliefs. And I think sometimes the way we view these matters today, it's like you would call Daniel soft for that. You're supposed to, stand up in the face of that, man. No. There's so much wisdom in the way he did this, and God blessed it. Daniel actually cared about not eating that food. It actually meant something to him that he not eat it. So he went about in the wisest way he could think to accomplish it. He knew that if he was raging and stuff like that, it wasn't going to work, yo. He had to show respect and honor and give options. And then God blessed that. That's exactly what happened. God blessed that. After the 10 days of eating the vegetables, and the water, versus these cats who were grubbing, you know what I'm saying? It's probably bomb, you know what I'm saying? We could eat it for a church banquet now, but they couldn't eat it then. So, glories of living in these latter days, perhaps. And the wine and all that, and they were better. It says they were fatter in flesh, so I guess maybe that's because there wasn't as much protein and their bodies ate the muscle and they were fat. I don't know. So that's a little plant-based diet joke there. Sorry, it's still so bad. They were better. But that's just before we before we get that's the next point. I just want to camp out a little bit more on his demeanor, respectful and resourceful. The prophet Jeremiah sent a letter to the exiles in Babylon. At this very same time, Jeremiah was preaching in Jerusalem. They were contemporaries. And God told Jeremiah to send a letter to the Jewish people who had went into exile and give them instructions on what to do. This is Jeremiah 29, 5 through 7. He says this, "Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Now again, that's contrary. The Jews at this time, they're not feeling that, They've been defiled, and because they've strayed from God, they've still taken pride in their heritage, and their heritage has been defiled. Like, they still went to the temple as religiously as ever, even though they weren't walking with God in Jeremiah's time and that sort of thing. So when they were taken into this foreign land, it was insufferable for them to submit to that, to live there and be there, and to have to live out their whole lives there. And so that was their gut reaction, is, no, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. And again, God's wisdom is surprising. It's shocking. It's different than we would think. God's wisdom to them is, no, plant roots there. In fact, don't pray for the demise of Babylon. Pray for its prosperity. Pray for the good of that city, because in its good is your good, because you're there. So seek its good. And Daniel, he really got on board with that program. That's what his whole life was, seeking the good of the city where God had sent him. And so it's a matter of stewardship. Daniel is a wise steward here. And his stewardship goes beyond, because he's not just taking care of like the things he has, like the opportunities he has and stuff. He's also taking care of the people around him. He's seeking the good, not just of the city in general, but like he's seeking the good of the eunuch who doesn't want his head chopped off. Daniel's sensitive to that. And he's finding a way, devising in God's wisdom, a way that he can protect the eunuch and seek his good, and at the same time stand on his convictions. It can be done. So he was a good steward. And his demeanor was that of a servant to this royal, Gentile, heathen court. He was a servant there. Fourthly, his development. This is the last point, his development. Okay, this is a lot of setup. It's just like a kickstart to get the story going, and it's pretty raw. So the development, we already saw some of this. God gave him favor. As soon as he took that stand of faith, and again, that stand of faith was calm. It was calm. It was reasonable, respectful. It was all that. It was calm. Once he did that, God honored it. God gave him immediate favor in the heart of the eunuch who was over him, and compassion. And as we'll see, Daniel continues to rise in favor until he has ultimate favor with not just Nebuchadnezzar, but literally all of these great kings that ruled over that whole world. Daniel was right there in their respect. God gave him favor. God gave him a supernatural excellence, him and his friends. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're eating like a high meat diet, you're going to get more muscle and more mass than if you eat a vegetable diet. That's just pretty much the facts. So how is it that them eating vegetables made them look, it says fatter in flesh, that was like profitable, that's how you said it. You're fat in flesh, you know what I'm saying? How was it that their plant-based and water diet did that? Because it was supernatural, man. There's just no other way to explain that, you know what I'm saying? These would have been thin guys to begin with. These are very young men. This is not the modern age. There's a very thin. So for them to build up any mass over a 10-day vegetable diet, in my opinion, it's just straight up supernatural. And this book is full of the supernatural. God's supernatural help of Daniel and his friends. And this is just the first instance of that. God blessed it. That wasn't their concern. They didn't get out the charts and the calories and try to figure that out. You know what I'm saying? They just simply trusted God. They knew what they had to do. They knew what God had said, and they left the rest to Him. And He did the rest. He also gave them, especially Daniel, supernatural wisdom and understanding. Verse 17, and as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. So their working knowledge of the whole Chaldean corpus, all that lore, was better than any others, 10 times better. And that's true of Daniel's friends also, and Daniel too. They were better at the lore and the learning and the laws of the land. That's crazy bars right there. They were better at it. And that's sort of a natural thing, but it was a supernatural endowment. God allowed them to be better in those natural matters. But then in this next one, this is just where it goes beyond. And so much of this book lands here. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. That's where it was next level. And again, that's a supernatural excellence that God gave to Daniel in his quiet faith. And He opened the doors of heaven and of time and space and of human history to Daniel. And he was able to understand those things. So he excelled because of God's great blessing. It says that they had a tenfold wisdom. This is in verse 20. And in every matter, so they did the 3 years, cum sum laude, is that the one? Cum sum laude 4.0? They were extraordinary in their class. And then as soon as they started serving the king after 3 years, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which he inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And he's drawing from all lands. So it's not just Daniel and his friends versus Babylon. It's Daniel and his friends versus all countries. This was a multicultural hub. And they're outstripping all the wise men of all the world in their simple faith with God's supernatural blessing. Pretty raw, pretty amazing. I just want to note one thing about that. It says that they excelled tenfold in every matter about which the king inquired of them. This is another theme in the book of Daniel. It's not like they had all the answers to all the problems ahead of time. Rather, when something comes up, they do in moral issues, obviously, like eating, but in puzzles and riddles and visions and that sort of thing, they didn't have all that answer. When something came up, God would give them wisdom in the moment. It was all the things He inquired about them. So they may not have much learning. They may be up against a wizard or sorcerer on the other side who's studied this, a specialist in this area, But they outstripped him in it, not because they prepared harder than him, but because God also gave them supernatural wisdom in the moment. And this means that their wisdom came from them actually walking with God. They walked with God through the moments of their lives, so that when something came up, they would turn to God. They would seek God. And they were pretty open about that. Bilbo was a little nerd, it was kind of a shock to his pride at first to admit to the dwarves that it was actually a magic ring that made him invisible, and that he wasn't actually that sneaky after all. But when it comes to Daniel and the source of his wisdom, he never hesitates to say, it's not me, there is a God who created all things, who shows these mysteries. And so it's their living relationship with God, just like for us. It is our living relationship with God in the moment of things where He will provide that wisdom. Jesus talked about that as far as evangelism goes. Don't think ahead of time of what to say, because what you are to speak will be given to you in that moment. For it is not you speaking, but your Father. That's amazing. And they exhibit that. One more thing there about their development is clearly Daniel's like the head. There's 4 of them, but it's like Daniel and the boys. That would be the band name, something like that. Daniel's the head. He's the leader. He's the one who resolved ahead of time, and they're kind of under him. And as we're going to study this book, we're going to see that just like all of God's great ministers of old, Daniel, too, foreshadows Christ in many ways. He's a Christ-like figure. Christ came into this world in the same way. Think of Christ, the way he spoke to Pilate. He wasn't on his P's and Q's with Pilate. And he told him, you have authority that was given to you by my Father. But Jesus, in his demeanor, honored that authority. He honored the authority of his mother and father and all the rest. Jesus came into the world, similar to how Daniel went to Babylon, in honoring that system of submission as a real human being, and within that system, shining beyond. And we, like Daniel's friends, we walk with Christ in this world. He's our leader. And he conforms us, makes us more and more like him. And following his lead in this world, we're able to walk with wisdom, even as the three friends did. So we'll see that throughout the book. Okay, let's end with a couple applications. We'll be through. First, let us live wisely in Babylon, beloved. Babylon becomes in the Bible this theme of the world system. The world system that eventually rises up to oppose God utterly and appears to be destroyed by the coming of Christ's power in the end. But Babylon is a nickname for the whole world system. And we're in Babylon, y'all. In that sense, we are in Babylon. We're in the world system. These centers of power that you see throughout, like Daniel's going to talk about them. There's centers of power in Babylon, and then Persia, and then Greek power, and then Roman power. There's these centers of power. Let's just be honest. There's a way in which where we live is a center of power in the world. Now that may be changing, but that's where we live right now. A center of prosperity and a center of worldly power. And there's a way in which that has to be identified in some way with the biblical idea of Babylon. And so we live within Babylon. We do. And Daniel's going to give us great wisdom, he already has, in how we can live wisely within the world system. How do we do that? With simple faith, beloved. Simple trust in Christ and his promises and his commands will give us a supernatural wisdom to walk through this world without compromising. And yet, at the same time, to be part of this world, to be in it and not of it, to be able to minister to others and to serve within it. That wisdom can give us both, so that in our hearts we're resolved with an iron resolve, but in our demeanors we're courtly, we're respectful, we're resourceful. We readily embrace the authority that others have over us. That's the way that we do it. And that's the way that God honors it, through that simple faith. Let us also, secondly, seek Babylon's good. Seek the good of the place where we live. Now, we understand this pretty well, but it is a good thing to do to seek the good of the place we live. Seek the good of the United States. And even more so, man, seek the good of more of our local provinces. Seek Minnesota's good, Minneapolis, Twin Cities good, Bloomington good, wherever you're at. All the way down the line, it should be a thought of ours. I'm seeking the good of the place where I live. It goes beyond that too, to our the people in our lives, no matter where we are, to seek their good. Just like Daniel sought the good of the eunuch, to be mindful of the concerns and worries of others in the way we walk, especially those who are over us in authority. Wow, that speaks volumes for God's glory. In our place of employment, to seek the good of you. If you work for a company, to seek the good of that company, so dope, so biblical, so biblical. There's a way in which we can be company men and women in that way. We're called to seek the good. And you see Daniel doing this with Nebuchadnezzar and these kings. He's just so self-consciously seeking their good. We should do that in our places of employment. In fact, that would be the first place you'd go if you want to rise within a company, is to seek the good of that company. Not to stand on your P's and Q's, but to be a good employee, seeking the overall good. That's what we're called to do. Or in school. As we study in school, and we're in submission to teachers in that way, to seek the good of the school where we study, to do our very best in our homework, to honor our teachers, to pray for them, you know what I mean? To seek the good of the school, to be involved in ways that we can to just better the condition of the place. Whether it's high school, college, wherever we are, that's a godly thing to do. And God would have us to do it. And in our homes, to seek the good of our homes. If you're in a position where you're under the authority of someone who's not a Christian, or someone you might disagree with sometimes, it is still the demeanor to seek the good of the household and to have that open submission and joy. That's good for the kids to hear that, I think, right? And I dare even say husbands to wives. Wow, see, look what I did there, man. Wives to husbands. Even now we can be knuckleheaded at times. There's something to that, to winning over the husband. Peter talks about that. It's contrary to our own wisdom. We wouldn't think to do things this way. This is the way God blesses it. If you want God's help to start doing things and shaking things up, you got to take Daniel's demeanor. That's the way. And then lastly, expect God to use you. Expect God to really use you, man. To use you, first of all, beyond what you're aware of. You know, God is using you in ways you're not aware of. And that's important to remember that. Keeps you going. To know that God is doing things through me at my place of employment, in my home life, in the city I live, with my whatever, wherever I'm involved with people and things, God is using me to do good. Pray that He would use you to do more good. And don't be surprised if your convictions for God's truth land you in a place of prominence. If they bring attention to you. Maybe at first seems like in a bad way, but if God gives you wisdom to handle that situation like Daniel did, it will turn out for God's glory and His good. All this is true because Christ is with us and He died to make us His people in this world, spreading the light of the knowledge of Him wherever we go. Well, there's a lot more to come. Just a nice little intro there. Let's pray. Lord, give us wisdom. We need it. Make us wise beyond our years, wise beyond our studies, wise beyond our being as humans. We pray for supernatural wisdom, the kind of wisdom that seeks peace and love, the kind of wisdom that is respectful and resourceful, and the kind of wisdom that never compromises on your truth no matter what happens to us. We pray that you bless this study and that you'll use us to shine your light this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.